Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Tessa Archibald. I'm a policy associate for the Animal Welfare Institute, and I manage the Homes for Horses Coalition. Just a couple things to keep in mind as we get started. Please stay on mute so that we can hear our speakers clearly. And this will be recorded, so if you need to hop off or want to share it, no worries. We will save questions to the end, but feel free to put them in the chat so that you don't forget them. Most of you joining today are members of the Homes for Horses Coalition, or we've worked together. But for those of you who aren't, I can share a short introduction. Homes for Horses Coalition has been active since 2007, when it started as a unique coalition to help horse rescues and ultimately help equines by ending horse slaughter. Today, HHG is led by AWI and American Wild Horse Conservation, and we have over 500 members who are equine rescue directors, equine professionals, and equine advocates. HHG is dedicated to providing spaces for collaboration and connection within the equine rescue world, as well as furthering advocacy and continued learning, like some of what we're doing today. So if you're here, you probably know the Tufts Center for Animals and Public Policy put out a report on a survey that they did surveying equine rescues and sanctuaries. I've worked with Dr. Rutberg and Mary Koncel, and they're great researchers. I'm a Tufts alum myself and a MAP alum, so I was happy to have HHG support their research questions and distribute the survey among HHG members. Of course, we all have firsthand experiences in the rescue space, but I think it's really important to bring those voices together to get that greater picture. So that's what the survey was intending. And anyway, I'll pass it over to Alan to introduce himself and talk a little bit more about the Tufts program.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Alan Rutberg. I'm the director of the Tufts Center for Animals and Public Policy, which is located at Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine. The center goes back really almost to the founding of the school, to the 1980s. We have a history of doing white papers like this, doing studies that are relevant to animal issues that people are interested in. In 1995, I guess, we started a master's program in animals and public policy, which I see we have, aside from Tessa and Mary, we also have a current student here in the group. That's an intensive one-year program where we look at, examine animal issues from cultural, ethical, economic, historical, all kinds of viewpoints, and share our views. So I've actually been at the center for almost 25 years now. Before that, I worked for 10 years with the Humane Society of the United States in their wildlife and habitat protection section, which doesn't quite exist anymore. And that was actually the time I got involved with mostly wild horse issues, and have been involved with, again, with Kayla Grams, who's also on this call, with a variety of projects looking at the use of fertility control, or the application of fertility control for control of free roaming herds of horses. So briefly, that's me. Mary?
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Koncel, and I received my master's in animals and public policy from the Tufts Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine. And I think that was it 2010? I'm not sure. Time flies. Right now, I'm an adjunct instructor at the Center for Animals and Public Policy. I've researched and written extensively about various equine topics, but I have a particular passion for wild horses and wild horse adoption. And I live in Massachusetts, and I'm very fortunate in that my equine family right now is Rain, and she is a beautiful BLM Mustang mare, and and Huck and Puck, and they are two absolutely amazing BLM burros. So.
Thanks so much, Mary. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can look more closely at the report. And
sure,
you're welcome to get started.
I can get started. I'll wait till you get it up. Great. I just want to start by thanking all of you for joining this conversation, and also once again send out a huge note of appreciation to all the organizations that participated in the survey. We know that they're very, very busy, and we just so appreciated the time that they took to be part of this research. A little bit of background. And if you've looked at the survey or the report, it's 32 pages. I think it's fascinating, but it may be a lot of information for people to take in. So what we decided to do is just kind of pull out some of the highlights of the reports, including our conclusions. And I'm going to go over some of those from the different sections. A major motivation for conducting this survey is our belief that there is a need for more data, more research on equines in need and the groups that care for them. Although there's hundreds upon hundreds of studies on facilities or groups that care for companion animals like dogs, cats, rabbits, whatever, as well as their relinquishment and adoption, research on equine rescue sanctuaries and humane societies is really quite sparse. And so, in fact, most of the existing equine research emphasizes the need for ongoing research in this field. So this survey is part of an effort to fill that gap. Our goal was to obtain current and representative data from equine welfare organizations across the United States. Our hope was that the survey will assist in providing more information about the national character of these important organizations and the work that they do, as well as facilitate an exchange of information among them, identify helpful training resources, and inform new initiatives and funding sources, both public and private, that can support the care of equines in need. I also want to clarify at this point that while the number of animals taken in and capacity is a very, very important topic, this is not the focus of our survey. And also, in terms of definition, equines include horses, ponies, donkeys, mules, both domestic and wild. In terms of our methodology, I think it was pretty straightforward. Between March and I think it was May 2024, the center conducted an online survey. We used Quadrix, and we collected data just from 2023. The survey consisted of multiple choice, ranking scale, and open-ended questions in these three categories: organizational structure and finances, equine residence, and veterinarian and health care. All of our responses were anonymous, and to recruit participants, we were really fortunate to partner with the Homes for Horses Coalition. Tessa, I should say, not they, but Tessa posted the survey on Homes for Horses social media outlets, as well as in the newsletter, and the center also posted it in our Facebook page and website, and subsequently it was shared by other groups and individuals. In terms of our analysis, we did use PSPS as statistics version 29. Our participants were 129 organizations from 39 states. These states most frequently represented was Texas, Virginia, California, and New York. 96 organizations completed the full survey and 33 submitted partial responses. And most organizations were rescues or sanctuaries, and some of them were a combination of both. I'm going to move on to equine residents in 2023. I'm going to give you some numbers, and I promise not to overwhelm you. So raise your hand or do something if you are feeling like, oh, this is too much. I know Tessa's scrolling down. 96 organizations reported that they took in 3,248 equines, with the median being 14.5. 89 organizations reported that they could accommodate 4,500 566 equines on site, and in this case, the median was 29. At the time of the survey, 3,596 equines were residing on site. The median was 25. All 40 organizations reported that they could accommodate 640 equines in foster care. The median was 6. At the time of the survey, 529 equines were residing in foster care, and the median was 6. Many of the organizations offered adoption. In 2023, 2,233 were placed into private homes. So we figured that about 2/3 of the number of equines taken in 2023 were adopted out. But it's important to note that some of them may have come to the organization at different times and not just 2023. In 2023, 279 equines were returned, but this includes equines placed before 2023. And in one of the comments, or actually several of the comments, we learned that some horses were returned or came back to the rescue or whatever organization, 7, 8 years, who had been placed 7 or 8 years ago. I know I mentioned that this survey is not focused on capacity, but we did find that that although a few organizations indicated they were at capacity, I think it was 6 or 7, most of them weren't at capacity. And we found this to be not only good news, but also encouraging because it suggests that some organizations are able to support the equine community, especially if an equine emergency rescue is needed. And one thing about research that I love, but also it can be so maddening, is how one question begets another question. And actually, before we got on this webinar, we started talking about what's capacity. And some of the things that came up, one of the issues that came up is, you could have the room for 40 horses or 50 in your pasture or barn, but do you have the financial resources or the people that that are needed to take care of them? Do you have the infrastructure? Blah. Moving away from numbers, we found that equines came from various sources, with, and not surprisingly, relinquishment by owners being the most common. I'll give you time. Okay. And followed by equine seized or transferred from law enforcement or other animal welfare organizations. And in this sample, retired racehorses, both standardbreds and thoroughbreds, also were a source uh, uh, in terms of intake. About a third of the organizations reported that they specialize. I'll let you get there. That they specialize in taking in a particular type or breed of equine. And the most frequently mentioned types or breeds were thoroughbreds, geriatric equines, and donkeys and mules. Slightly less than half of the organizations evaluate an equine before taking him or her into their care. The 3 most common reasons for not accepting an equine, even if space was available, was not being gelded, behavior issues, and quality of life being exhausted. And the question raised here that one of the questions we had was, even though we know these organizations are evaluating horses, we don't know what the process is. And we suspect that it would be quite varied. Maybe it would be in-person visits. Maybe it would be people just calling or whatever. The other thing that our data shared was that not being gelded is a significant barrier to being accepted. And this supports the need for owners assuming responsibilities for that, and also nonprofits helping to pay for gelding. It seems like it's well invested money, and I think Tessa might talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Mary.
Yeah.
That I feel like this page really highlights the importance of safety net programs, which I know so many organizations have already, but this just, emphasizes that in terms of, gelding being a barrier for horses finding a new home. Behavior issues, certainly, we know that investing in training of horses can really protect them for that longer term. And then quality of life being exhausted as well. Certainly so many organizations have services that will support euthanasia and end of life care for horses in their community, and that's really important, to be able to care for horses in that way and support the community. So while these were, it's not particularly surprising, I guess it really emphasizes the need and the importance of those programs that do exist and the expansion of them as well.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Tessa. We wanted to talk a little bit about challenges, and what we did is we pulled out what we thought were two of the major challenges. The first one, and this tended to be more for the smaller or mid-sized organization, was not surprisingly fundraising and rising operational costs, mostly hay and feed and veterinarian care. Central to this is operating budgets. In 2023, operating budgets ranged from $5,000 to $5 million, which is quite a huge spread. But about 53% of the organizations had budgets of $100,000 or less. About 50 of the organizations spent between 40 and 90% of their budget on hay and feed. And we all know, especially I think if you live out west, how the cost of hay just is continuing to get bigger and bigger. About 30 of the organizations spent between 30 and 70% of their budget on veterinarian care. 20% was the median. And for hay and feed, I forgot to mention 40% was the median. So this made us start thinking a little bit. For organizations with smaller budgets, obviously most of their money seems to be going toward these two basics. So there's not a lot of money left over for other expenses or flexibility in terms of maybe infrastructure or, if hiring staff and trying to pay them reasonable wages. Scarcity of equine grants in general add to this funding challenge. From the comments, and I was so glad that we included comments because we ended up getting some really important insights and information from them. But anyway, from these comments, small rescues and sanctuaries believe that they are overlooked for grants because foundations prioritize high adoption rates over mom and pop operations and sanctuaries that provide long-term care of equines. And that long-term care of equines, that is so important, but we also know it's so expensive. While sources of funding varied, personal funds provided by the founder or the executive director was somewhat frequent, which is a little bit concerning in terms of the future of those organizations. The question is, will they be able to carry on if and when the founder or executive director is no longer involved? And further, we asked questions about participation of board members, and one of the concerns by the organizations were several of them reported a relative lack of participation by boards when it came to fundraising, which is so essential. And this is a big part of what a board member is. Oh, I'm sorry, you're skipping around, Tessa.
Oh, you're good. There we go.
Yeah. A second major challenge for many organizations was staffing. We found this amazing. A little over 50% of the organizations had no full-time or part-time employees. The vast majority of the organizations, and especially the medium to small organizations, relied on volunteers. Many organizations had trouble recruiting and retaining both qualified staff and volunteers. When it came to staffing, one comment that came up often is being able to pay staff reasonable salaries, and also finding experienced trainers who can prepare equines not only for adoption, but also to teach volunteers how to work with horses. And remember, given that so many of these organizations depend on volunteers, having them be well trained is so important. Uh, to address these two challenges, organizations thought that more training in fundraising and volunteer recruitment and retention would be helpful. And finally, this is something we got from the comments. Organizations in rural areas face a particular set of issues. These include greater difficulty finding staff and volunteers, limited community support, lack of access to veterinarian services. One or two of them mentioned that the closest vet was something like 3 hours away, and less funding. The scarcity of rescues and sanctuaries in these states also, and one of the placer states was Oklahoma, also places an extra burden on those that do exist. Um, I'm going to just switch over to some more good news. Although organizations face a lot of challenges, there are two areas where we found some really exciting and um, findings, and encouraging, I should say, too. The first one is in veterinarian care. Um, Most of the organizations were satisfied with their veterinarians in terms of quality of care and their knowledge about and experience with caring for equines in rescues and sanctuaries. Not surprisingly, a small caveat, about half of them wished for better discounted or pro bono services. And I have to say, I recently got my invoice from my vet for spring shots and vaccinations. I only have 3 animals in my herd, and so I understand that sentiment, but I still love my vets. So, and we really were a little surprised by this. Many of the organizations, even if they had limited budget, offered some type or combination of alternative or complementary health care. Top of that list was chiropractic, massage therapy, and acupuncture. The other area was adoption. Uh, we're really pleased with this. Most of the organizations provided training to their equines before adoption, even though finding trainers could sometimes be difficult and having volunteers that were qualified to work with the horses. The source of the training varied widely, with on-site professional trainers, volunteer, and staff being the most frequently mentioned. Um, and as mentioned, a top item on their wish list was more trainers. So yay for them. Another area that was so impressive with organizations is that all of them that offered adoption had an adoption contract. And the stipulations varied, but the most frequently mentioned were restrictions on sales, transfer, or leasing of an adopted equine, a take back policy, and a no breed stipulation. So those seem to be three very, very important stipulations. And some closing thoughts. Um, Whether an organization was well funded and big, like some of the humane societies, or just a single individual wanting to make a difference, the organizations that participated in this survey are committed to their work of helping equines in need. We also found that even though many of the organizations are small and have limited budget, they maintain incredibly high standards for their equine residents. And this is evidenced by, for example, their intake protocols, the adoption contracts, which seem to be fairly strict, as well as implementing, as well as the vet care and alternative health care that they provide. And as I mentioned, we did include open-ended questions, and we got some wonderful responses, very, very poignant ones. And I especially love this one as it captures, I think, the essence or the spirit of the work that these equine groups are doing. So I'm going to include this just to end this part of the conversation. We face considerable challenges, but are proud of what we were able to accomplish. It's so short and simple, and it just seems like it says it all. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks so much for that overview, Mary. Alan,
You're
is there
welcome, Tessa.
anything you want to add before I hop in?
Nope, I'm good.
Great.
Oh, Alan, I'm sorry. You said Alan. I'm sorry.
Alan said no too. That's great.
Okay.
I just wanted to, dive into some of the takeaways that I had in terms of actionable steps that we can take and, things that I got out of this, that I can help support rescues do, through my work for Homes for Horses. So I already talked a little bit about the safety net funding and how important that was. Being able to support equines throughout their entire lifespans is so essential. And, being able to have organizations, nonprofits in the community that are educating owners about those steps that you need to take to protect equines and, being able to provide sometimes that financial support through a safety net, through a gelding program, through a euthanasia program, and the training as well, I think is really essential. Whether you yourself are offering training that, isn't necessarily required, but, emphasizing how important that is, as we all know, finding that completely unhandled stallion is a new place to land is going to be a lot more challenging. Let's see. What else did I have here? We talked a little bit about engaging the board in more fundraising. So from our survey, it seemed that only about half of folks feel that their board is engaged in fundraising. Certainly with funding being a huge challenge reported, being able to have more people on your side, especially if they're already engaged really deeply with that organization, is so important. They're signing up to support your organization, to be there with you. And so fundraising and, having the income to be able to support the organization is so critical. So that's definitely something that I want to dive into a little bit more. Something else that came up, similar to that safety net, just about the equine community at large. And I know this is something that so many rescues do already, and I think it was reported somewhere in the survey about, educational opportunities offered to the community. In terms of the medical issues that a lot of equines were coming in with, parasites was a large one that was reported, dental issues, skin issues, potentially, overall, those are pretty manageable, for the average horse owner. So providing education about how important it is that horses get their teeth done, about protecting equines from bugs, about worming, is really essential and, might be something that's missing in the community that is affecting equine welfare. And then those horses come in with those issues on a really grander scale. Something else we saw was talking about finding volunteers. Just an observation that we had was, finding volunteers is a huge challenge, but also, only half of folks have paid staff. So while finding volunteers is a huge challenge, they also rely so heavily on those volunteers. So, finding some way to, connect nonprofits with volunteers that are reliable, they don't need to have that horse experience right away, but, can learn how to take on new skills in a nonprofit setting is really important. So, something else to look into. And again, we have some resources on some of these already, but it's certainly something that continues to be a challenge. And how can we as a group, does anyone have a great volunteer program that they can, share with other folks and make sure that everybody has the help and support that they need. We talked a little bit about diversifying income and, focusing on succession planning. That's super important, if that source of income changes. And, overall, just to wrap up, what I just talked about, certainly I think the themes that are coming to me are, that education for community members, and being able to support horses in their homes where they're at so that they don't need to find a new placement, or if they do, that can be a little bit more seamless. Funding is consistently a challenge, as we know. And then finding good people is a challenge, whether that's training trainers, volunteers, or staff. Certainly there are so many fantastic people out there in the horse world. So how do we get them over into the equine rescue world, and supporting nonprofits that really could use their skills? I don't have the answers to all of those questions, obviously. These are just some of the observations that jumped out at me and, that I'm going to be thinking about as I develop resources for Homes for Horses, as I choose webinar speakers, and as I, start conversations with our community. So
I just
guess,
wanted, I'm sorry,
yes.
Tessa, I just wanted to mention in terms of training, we didn't include this in this overview, but most of the organizations offered some type of training, not only to their staff, but to their volunteers. So that's a really important step in the right direction.
Definitely.
Yeah.
As well as training to the horses in their care. There was really high investment in training the horses that come into their care, which is fantastic. So we want to kind of open it up for questions, if anybody has any questions or comments right off the bat. But otherwise, I will ask a question to hopefully get us started. Were there any findings from the survey that surprised you?
Alan, do you want to go first, or?
Sounds like Tessa is opening this up to the audience.
Yes, I am.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
But if anybody, Alan and Mary, you're welcome to contribute as well.
Hi, Dee Dee here. I guess I was a little surprised to find out how many small organizations responded, which is great to see because a lot of times when we go to Homes for Horses Coalition events, it's a lot of really big organizations, and being a smaller all volunteer organization ourselves, it's hard. It's hard when you see people have $1 million budgets and all kinds of infrastructure, to not think, gosh, we're really hanging out here all by ourselves and not really mattering all that much. So it was good to see there are other small organizations out there, and that they're feeling the same kind of pangs that we are, and especially in terms of grants. Every grant that we apply for, they want to know, what new program are you doing? It's like, we're still trying to feed him and vet him and train him, and we wish that the people who give grants could see this survey to see how many of us there are that aren't in a position to be coming up with new programs, because we're struggling to just plain take care of them, especially those of us who offer sanctuary, and, as you said, the most expensive time of their lives.
That was, like I said, I think to me that was one of the most poignant findings, is that, as you said, Dee Dee, how small the organizations were, and the limited budget. And I was shocked that most of these, or at least half of the organizations, I think it was, were working on $100,000 or less. I mean, that is just incredible. But on the other hand, they seem to be doing a lot for the equines. A number of them, offer the complementary and alternative care. And and as you said, I mean, these organizations are struggling to provide, not just basic, but oftentimes above basic care. And and you know, I think foundations need to recognize that. And also the other issue that came up is the amount of time that these smaller organizations had to spend writing and applying for grants. That was, and I think a number of them referred to themselves as mom and pop organizations. So that's a really important.
Dr. Grandy, good to see you.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Hi, Lorna.
Good.
Hi. Thank you so much for doing this. This is really wonderful information. Really, really appreciate it. I had a question about, I know this was a survey, and I think we're all very aware that sometimes rescues' perception of what they do and the care they give and what they do isn't the reality. And I don't mean to say that, blanket, but I do know that I visited a lot of equine rescues that I think would have come out stellar on your survey, but if you actually walked into their place, you might feel differently. So I'm wondering, kind of how we adjust for that.
I'm thinking.
But you know what I mean? I mean, has anyone else had
No.
that
I mean,
experience?
I think that is a really valid question. And, what we could try to, I mean, what we're looking at is the data. I also, to some point, I think maybe the comments helped a little bit to get a better picture of what was going on. But I also want to think maybe that the groups that responded are the groups that would be more responsible. But again, that's an assumption. I don't know if Tessa or Alan or anybody else has a comment. Oh, my screen is going crazy.
Mhm.
Given how much on a shoestring it seems like many of these organizations are, it's not hard to imagine circumstances where they would not be able to live up to their own standards and aspirations. That if they're relying on volunteers, volunteers come and go, hay prices go up. It's pretty easy to imagine some of them becoming strained.
Yeah, well, I mean, generally the news that you have is good, so it's great. Thank you for doing it.
I think one of the other things that I have discovered in visiting other rescues is the standards they really, really, really vary. And what one person thinks is fantastic care, another one thinks is terrible care. And you can even get into something as simple as should horses be kept in stalls overnight or not? And I think you could get into a raging debate with that, simply because of how people feel about how horses should be kept. And for one side to say, anybody who doesn't put a horse in a stall is abusive and neglectful. And on the other side, anybody who does make horses stay in stalls is damaging their physical and emotional health. So it really gets pretty tricky. And I think part of the problem is as anything with horses is education. And it's stunningly apparent to me that whether people are in the rescue business, the show business, whatever, the lack of real knowledge about the nature of horses, what's best for them, mentally, physically, in terms of training and housing and so forth and so on. And I don't know how, first of all, you get that information to people, and secondly, you help them understand it. So I'm not sure how in the world that would ever, show examples, keep trying. I don't know, maybe Tessa has a thought about that.
I wish I knew. I think I'm still on your keep trying. The more of us out there, I guess, that are sharing factual information and peer-reviewed research on horse care and nature. And it is really important. And I do think that kind of field and interest is growing, and it has to grow, especially, with social license to operate, and, the way that horse sports certainly are experiencing that right now. And so I think there is coming somewhat of a reckoning. At least that's my perception. But also, maybe that's because I'm just in my bubble of folks that like to talk about what's best for horses. So, but I think you raise a really great point about just like how different people's perceptions, their understanding of horses, where they live, cultural differences in horse care can affect perception of like good or poor care. Marcy, do you have? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I just being coached by Pebbles, our executive director, but to speak up about horse care, there is such a vast expanse, as you guys have all talked about, of what's considered good or bad or appropriate. But we're finding that if it's based on the 5 domains, and if they're really looked at and considered and applied to, the best of the horse keeper's ability, that covers a lot of ground, and it kind of neutralizes a lot of, opposing viewpoints. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, Marcy. I'm glad you're here. Kathleen was bringing our attention to page 20 about sources of equines. I don't know if you had any thoughts, Kathleen, on getting started on that page.
Yeah, I can kick it up a little bit. So why not? So one of the things that when I first looked at this Tufts was the law enforcement seizure and relinquishment by owners. Those can be tied, or they can be completely separate, right? Because you have kind of some relinquishments are forced by situations with law enforcement. I'm looking at, I think of a couple different things. Like we didn't really talk about, one of the things I like to talk to my groups about is their relationship with the animal control officers in their area. So that, because in speaking about education, like a lot of those guys don't have education. A lot of them, it's a very rapid turnover of staff usually in animal control offices. And so the education's a hard thing. And we work with that a lot in Virginia with our officers, but we still don't have great relationships in a lot of areas with them. And so obviously the more they can rely on the rescues, the more rescues are going to get horses from those kinds of situations where they really need the help of rescue. And then, of course, given social media and everything, the auctions and the kill pins, I'd love to see this like a time lapse of some of these bars shrinking and growing, but that's my personal standpoint. And I was just wondering if anybody else had thoughts on that.
Yeah, Joanne, go for it.
It says Marcy, but it is
Your name,
Joanne. Sorry,
Marcy.
I have Marcy's link. I also think that the accreditation process is worth going through to show that you really are doing the things the right way. We have the Global Federation, we have the TAA for your thoroughbreds, and also the Equus guardianship. All of those are ways that even smaller organizations can go through the process. And I think that really helps with your donations and just showing that you're really going the extra mile to do what's right for the horses.
And Joanne, since you're on, I was wondering if you would speak about your arrangement with Virginia Tech regarding your free veterinary services.
There are different things that ways you can work with your veterinarians to get free care. A lot of veterinarians are more than willing to donate their time. They just don't want to donate their stuff. So if you can, like the arrangement, we have 3 veterinarians that help us at our farm, and basically they give us their time, but we pay for everything, even a rubber glove that comes off their truck. Because again, they're more than willing to help. They really want to help with our mission. And then your local colleges too, you can talk to them. And we do a lot of, we partner with Virginia Tech and help them with a lot of research. And in return, we get a lot of good vet care, very low cost vet care. So again, there are lots of ways you can work with the system. If anybody's interested, I can put my email in the chat box and you can email me and I'll be glad to discuss it further.
Yay, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to mention, I think it was Marcy who talked about relationships between equine groups and law enforcement. One of the comments that we received was, I think there were probably 3 or 4, was that in these participants' areas, they felt that animal welfare abiding by animal welfare regulations in their relationship with law enforcement was not very good. So, and I think that tended to be more in the rural areas. So that was just something that we noted.
I have another question that I guess we've kind of touched on a little bit, but what else would you like to know? How does the survey and report kind of get you thinking about specific topics that you want to learn more about, that you think should be dove deeper into? I know Mary has some ideas on things she wants to learn, but if anybody else has any thoughts on specifically what would be helpful.
What about like breakout groups like they do with the American Horse Council, or I'm not sure, but
Oh, that's a good call. And just force people to talk to each other.
they have like the breakout states. So like Maryland has,
Okay.
Texas. That's what were you thinking, Tessa?
I was just thinking right now, I just make everybody go into breakout rooms and talk to each other. But I don't actually know how, so.
I think also doing some roundtables where you have maybe somebody who is further along in the process can mentor some of the ones that are not. I think, we've done a lot of roundtable groups and I think that was really helpful. I know I gain a lot from that.
Yeah, I love the concept of mentors. I guess I raised my hand, but I didn't mean to. And I know Lynn, I don't know how to unraise it either. Lynn is on from Equus, and I know, they have mentor organizations. And I think there's such value in, not having to reinvent the wheel all the time, and in learning from those who have been successful and those who have probably struggled with things that you are struggling with now. And I just think that's a wonderful idea to try to implement.
Absolutely. I know Kathleen does a great job of that in Virginia, of bringing people together, who are all learning all different stages of that process. I try with Homes for Horses. It can be challenging with so many folks from all over the country, but definitely something that I can commit to more is, I think the more these conversations happen and people can share information, there can be improvements.
Okay, I think I had my hand raised for Marcy because I'm also on Marcy's
You're
shared link.
also Marcy.
Oh, that's why I
This
wanted
is-
everybody on.
This is Pebbles.
You guys need
Turnerville
another
Horses.
Zoom account.
I know. So I was technically supposed to be on another Zoom, but that person didn't show up. So I'm glad I could attend. And Marcy gave me her link. But
Yep.
and this is totally thinking out of the box. And I don't know if this has been done or being done. But you know, all horse people go to the feed store. Or at least they should go to the feed store. This might be an area where maybe they're not going to the feed store, but if there's a way to do something with feed stores where at one point in time, Purina used to do this, and this was like 20 years ago. They had first time owner clinics or workshops. So I just wonder if there's some way of doing like training a bunch of people who could travel around, like I'm in South Carolina, travel around feed stores during workshops or clinics to help people understand how to take care of their horses. And again, I don't even know if that's really on the topic, but that's just a thought that just came into my brain while we were talking about this.
I think it's a great idea. I've been to some of those, and a lot of them are sponsored by particular feed companies, and obviously their mission is to promote their feed. So I think, with a grain of salt, but a good idea.
And it might be, maybe to have a product, but, again, Marcy, going off of who we are, Horses and Humans Research Foundation, kind of talking about perhaps the 5 domains in the research and how to kind of bring in people where they are so that you're not condemning them for having certain types of fencing or condemning them for having their horse, this way or that way, kind of helping educate them and showing them some ways to improve where they have their horse and how to improve or enhance or like bring their horse up to a better standard or bring their education.
And I'm just reading the chat, and in case everyone hasn't seen it, Emily, I hope I pronounce it, Stearns, says we're working to amass a list of feed stores across the country to do just this. And she has interns working on it. So bravo.
Yeah. This is something we've been talking about. Hi, Pebbles. It's Emily.
Hey.
This is something we've been talking about through the United Horse Coalition, and we literally, it's so funny you said it, Pebbles, because we just started it. We had an intern start it 2.5 weeks ago. So we should have something to share with that in the next 6 months or so. I imagine it's a very big process, so I imagine that'll take probably 2 rounds of interns. But we also, and if anybody else would like tips on getting interns on projects, we've been very, very successful in getting intern projects. We have 12 to 15 interns a year. They are mostly free because they do it for school credit. They're fully remote. We go through the colleges, so we know they're vetted, and they just completed 2 really cool projects for us that we're going to share at our conference. One is we did a survey across the country, or not a survey, we documented across the country the availability of euthanasia and disposal. So we documented disposal options for every state, and we've put together a database for that. And then we did another industry welfare impact report of what non-501c3s are doing to support welfare. So that would be breed associations, discipline associations. We do a lot of capacity stuff through the EWDC, which this report that you guys just talked about, it's so great to see how the information is working back and forth. And it's been really nice to see the data coming out of your report. But yeah, the interns have been great. And, people talk about not being able to find volunteers. the interns can do all the office stuff, which I find really frees up people's brains to get creative, that you can focus on the hard stuff if you have people just going in and, you know, organizing databases for you. Like interns are really great at that.
I also want to mention, you know, the idea of feed stores or, you know, different feed companies having seminars or whatever, I think is great. We had, for a while, we had quite a few of them out in Western Mass. But our veterinarians, a number of practices, also did some really interesting seminars and workshops. They were really well attended. And sometimes it was just basic care. Other times it was maybe something about emergency care, that sort of thing. So, you know, that could be another resource too. And some veterinarians, I think, really love to get involved at that community level.
You're all talking about interns. Don't forget about AmeriCorps, or AmeriCorps is a government program that actually pays college students to work at your farm. We have 2 or 3 of those each semester. And the beauty of that is they're paid by somebody else. So don't forget about that. Check your local colleges, because that is also probably available to you.
I'll caution you on that too. It's starting to be kind of systemically shut down in multiple states with the current administration.
We still have it here, thank goodness.
We've lost it in New Hampshire, unfortunately.
Alrighty, thanks everybody so much for joining and for spending this time with us, going through this report and talking about, you know, what we got out of it. Mary and Ellen, anything to add before we hop off?
Sure. If any of you have any, again, ideas of things that we might want to be looking at, if there's information that we should go deeper on, or if there are other topics, please let us know. Mary is always looking for projects, and we have a little funding. So
yeah, I just wanted to again thank everybody who came into this or participated in this webinar. These.
Oh, Mary, we lost you.
I know. I just it wasn't my cat.
It wasn't the cat.
Yeah, no, it was me, my imaginary cat. But anyway, just thank you so much. There's really interesting conversation, and I love the idea of mentorships and, you know, roundtables and whatever. There's and like I said, we really are truly indebted to the groups that participated, and you know, there's so many more questions that we could dig deeper into, but we also want to know what, as Alan said, would benefit you, because that's the whole purpose of doing these studies. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks all for being here. Hope you're well and have a nice afternoon.